Let's talk a little bit about demand and willingness to pay. This module is about another interpretation of the individual's demand curve, and therefore the market demand curve. We generally think that the willingness to pay for units of a product depends on how many units you've already consumed. You can see this fairly vividly if you think about, say, a situation where you're absolutely parched and you need some water. You don't have any. That first drink of water would have a really high benefit to you, or you could say in some jargon terms that the marginal utility of that first drink of water would be high. Compare that to a situation in which you've eaten and eaten and eaten and eaten, as in this scene from a Monty Python movie, and the question is about that last bite. What's the benefit to you from that last bite? And I think we generally would think that the marginal utility or the additional benefit to the consumer of that last bite after you've had many, many, many bites of food is low. In general, you could say that most goods have declining marginal utility, or just in colloquial terms, that we tend to get sick of stuff. Well, the demand curve shows how the individual's willingness to pay varies with the number of units consumed. And so it reflects this same kind of relationship about getting sick of stuff. Imagine that Joe is thinking about what he would be willing to pay for the first apple. And the amount he's willing to pay for this first apple is $5. Then ask the question, what would he be willing to pay for a second apple? Well, a second apple wouldn't be as exciting for him as the first, so he'd only be willing to pay $2 for the second apple. A third apple would be even, in some sense, less exciting to him. He'd only be willing to pay $1 for that third apple. And for the fourth apple, he'd only be willing to pay 50 cents. Well, if that were the case, that's what Joe's demand curve for apples would look like. But now we're going to call it his willingness to pay for each apple, because the demand curve contains this information about the willingness to pay. Essentially, Joe's demand curve for apples shows us what apples are worth to Joe. We could ask ourselves the following question. Suppose Joe had no apples and then received a basket of 4 apples. What would that be worth to Joe? Well, the first apple would be worth 5, and the second would be worth 2, so the first 2 together would be worth 7. Third apple would be worth 1, and the fourth apple would be worth 50 cents. So if we sum up all those numbers in the middle column, we get to the bottom number in the third column of $8.50. So the question is, what would 4 apples be worth to Joe if he had no apples? The answer is $8.50. Takeaways from this short module are as follows. Points along a demand curve show an individual's willingness to pay for that particular unit of the product, like the first unit or the second unit or the third unit. The area under the demand curve then shows the value that consumers attach to products if they were available without charge.